And we will leave some time for discussion now. So are there any questions? And they can also be focused more in family law because we're really lucky to be joined by Sheila Sparks, who is a family law lawyer. So I received one question, does this include mental illness? But I don't have further context for that. Was that to do with legal capacity, perhaps, for decision making? I don't know whether either Krista or Sheila would be able to comment on how the topics we've covered today apply to mental illness and mental health diagnoses.
Sure, I can speak to that. So when we're looking at whether a person has mental capacity or not, that it's really a case-by-case situation. I think last week we talked a lot about dementia. We spoke a little bit about mental capacity. Every woman's experience of whatever illness they have is very unique, and most people with mental illness are going to have mental capacity to make all their decisions. They might not have mental capacity to make some of their decisions, but it really depends on the individual person. If you have a mental illness, you might have appointed someone under a representation agreement to help you make decisions. Then you haven't lost your capacity to make decisions. You really just have a helper in place. If someone has a mental illness that's episodic in nature, it might be that they sometimes have mental capacity and sometimes don't. Everyone's experience is fairly unique, but definitely the adult guardianship legislation, how it discusses the ability of authorities to intervene to protect an older woman, would include situations of mental illness if she lacked capacity or her illness in some way impacted on her ability to protect herself. But if a person has mental capacity, they have a right to live at risk, make their own decisions, whether or not you have a mental illness, as long as you've got that capacity to make your own decisions. And when we talk about capacity, we generally mean the ability to understand information, process it, and make decisions. You may make decisions that somebody else disagrees with, but if you can still think, reflect on information, take the information in, you likely still have your own mental capacity.
Thank you so much for that.
And if I can just add something, I'm not sure if the question was directed at mental capacity with respect to the eligibility for a Canada Pension Plan disability benefit.
Perhaps, yes, great point.
So if that's what that was directed to, then yes, mental illness or lack of mental capacity is certainly one of the types of incapacity that would allow one to become, or might allow one to become eligible for a Canada Pension Plan disability benefit. The issue, of course, becomes if somebody who is suffering from a mental illness is not capable of recognizing that, not willing to recognize that, not able to make the connections that are necessary in order to apply for a CPP disability benefit, that of course poses a problem. So then we get back into the whole question of who can represent and take care of that person's interests on the logistical end of things. But yes, in and of itself, a mental incapacity can qualify a person for CPP disability.
Thank you so much for that, Sheila.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? Great question. What is happening to address concerns of undue influence against older adults, especially in combination with diminishing capacity?
So that's a great question. Now, one of the tools that's available on the Canadian Centre for Elder Law and the BC Law Institute's website is a guide for wills practitioners regarding undue influence. It includes a 4-page fact sheet, sort of 4-page guide on what to do if you're concerned about undue influence. So I would encourage you to go to our website and take a look at it if you have questions about undue influence. But certainly elder abuse is often tied to undue influence. So when we say, for other folks who are listening, undue influence, when we use that word, we generally mean situations where a person is acting in a way that doesn't reflect their own true wishes, but somebody else is pressuring them or controlling their decision-making in some way. Now, if someone has used undue influence to pressure someone to sign a representation agreement or power of attorney, or that steps would be best taken to reflect with the woman on what her true intentions are, and you can support her to revoke those documents and get someone put in place that she wants to be a substitute decision maker, or maybe she doesn't even need a substitute decision maker. Maybe she got pressured into signing a document that is not helping her with her life at all. So in a context of undue influence, it's sometimes very helpful to help a woman with a revocation of an agreement. A person who is a substitute decision maker might be otherwise using their power then to pressure a woman once they have their authority. Now, if it's a committee or a guardian and a woman doesn't have mental capacity anymore, she doesn't have the powers to revoke, but you may be able to assist her to in other ways to question the authority. In that context, if the woman does not have mental capacity and there is undue influence and there is a substitute decision maker, a good first step would be to contact the public guardian trustee and see if they have authority to intervene to assist them with the situation.
And if I can just add something, and I'll say thanks largely in part to organizations like the Canadian Centre for Elder Law and West Coast LEAF, lawyers and law societies generally are far more aware of the issue of elder abuse and undue influence. And so, for instance, in British Columbia with the Family Law Act, there's a very expanded definition of family violence, which includes psychological or emotional abuse of a family member, and the definition of that includes harassment and intimidation. So there's a very keen awareness on the part of lawyers about that issue in particular, and hopefully as that becomes more commonly, sounds terrible to say more commonly known because you don't want the issue to become more prevalent, but as we as lawyers become more aware of it, we're certainly very watchful for any of the warning signs that might indicate to us that somebody coming into us, whether it's in a family law file or in an estate planning file, or just coming to talk to us for general advice, a high level of awareness about who they come with and who drove them to the office and who's picking them up and who are they living with, and all of those kinds of things that might clue us into the fact that there may be something broader going on here than we might otherwise have been aware.
And I think one of the points that Alana mentioned earlier on this presentation is the kind of ageism that happens where even well-meaning helpers talk to a younger person who's in the presence of an older woman rather than to the older woman herself.
Yeah.
In getting your own awareness up to speed about whether this is a situation of undue influence, it's really important to talk to the older woman directly and figure out what her experience is and what it is that she wants. And that can sometimes mean briefly isolating her from, especially an adult child who might be controlling the puppet strings a little bit. It can be very challenging to help a woman to feel comfortable to talk to you without that other person present, but it can be crucial to making sure you're getting directions that are really the directions she wants about where her life is going next.
Thank you for that. I think we may have time for one more question. This question involves an older adult whose adult son has taken money from her bank account via online banking, and the older adult isn't familiar with online banking. And the RCMP are saying that this is a civil situation and they can't help. And the older adult isn't comfortable pressing charges against her son. So what types of options could that woman consider? What support may be available?
That's a really good question. I think that there's always two separate questions, whether, yes, this situation very much could be a criminal act, but we always want to be mindful about what is it the older woman wants to happen. And it's very true that for a lot of older women, even if their adult child is harming them or done things that are illegal, like stealing their money, they do not want to press charges against their family members. And it's very important to respect the wishes of an older woman about what she wants to happen to help keep herself safe. So I think a very important step is to have her talk to her financial institution, and maybe there's a way you can help her to have that conversation with her financial institution about what are the different ways, things she can do to help keep her money safer in the future. Accessing online generally means that she's probably shared her PIN, and it's very common for younger family members to get the PIN from an older person under the auspices of helping them with their banking. But it's her account. She has a right to change her PIN, and that will probably make it a lot more difficult for her son to be able to get money from the account. It's very important to loop the financial institution into what's going on. You know, if there's a concern that the son is taking money and she wants to stop it without charging him, you know, if the financial institution is alive to this risk, they can be a lot more careful about what kind of transactions they permit on the account. Now, the question also comes down to, like, is it a joint account or not? Like, has she given the son a shared interest in the account? If he partially owns the money, if it's a joint account, he owns the money as well. So this, the situation is very different. So in this kind of situation, you also might need to get more information about what type of account is it a joint account or not, and what are his actual rights to the funds.
And if I can just add something as well, I know that this isn't me speaking as a lawyer, actually more as a wife of a police officer, frankly. I know that a lot of the police forces do have victim assistance programs. I don't know to what extent those programs are connected with a charge being laid against a son or a family member or anyone for withdrawals of the nature that the questioner is referring to, but a lot of them do have victim assistance services, so it might be worth checking out and asking the question of the local detachment or the police force within the questioner's jurisdiction to see whether there is any help that might be available to that person.
Yeah, and if the person is in Vancouver and it's possible to work with an elder abuse unit, they do have a social worker or a counselor attached to the unit. And what we have heard from elder abuse detachments is that something like 75% of the work they do, they would characterize more as social work than as helping folks get prosecuted than arresting people. So the police are really well placed to help link people to helpful resources.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we're just about out of time, about a minute left. So there are lots more resources for support or information if an older woman just wants to explore her options and rights without feeling pressured to take any particular action. In our Roads to Safety handbook, about 10 pages just listing community resources that can support her. So really encourage you to check it out. We thank you so very much for joining us today and asking such great questions. And huge thanks to Sheila for joining the conversation and adding her expertise, and to Krista for the great collaboration. And we hope you will keep in touch with us. Our contact info is on the slide. You can follow us on social media and get lots more information on our websites. So thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very
and
much.
by all means, we've got our emails too. If you have comments or questions about the guide, we always welcome comments from folks about what they think about our tools.
Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to being in touch in the future.